A position statement I would like to be presented by our communication team. Josiah Joekai is going to go ahead and present that.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. So this statement is strictly for the Speaker and members of Congress. And so we will read the statement, and we have a special copy for the Speaker and congressional members.
Yeah, sounds good.
Good. So we will read, and after that we'll present the statement to you so that you can all transmit
Pass
to the
along.
Speaker.
Yeah, absolutely.
Special statement in support of Resolution 1055 presented to the United States Congress by U.S.-based Liberians. Madam Speaker and members of the United States Congress, today Liberians have gathered under the banner March for Justice and Accountability in Liberia on Capitol Hill before the United States Congress to express their firm support for House Resolution 1055, unanimously passed by the House of Representatives in 2018 and currently awaiting the concurrence of the Senate and subsequent signing into law by President Donald J. Trump. Special thanks to former Representative Daniel M. Donovan Jr. of District 11, New York State, who introduced the resolution. Similar appreciation goes to all of the sponsors of the resolution, the House's Committee on Foreign Affairs for adoption, and the entire membership of the House of Representatives for the unanimous passage of the resolution. Absolutely, Liberians have no doubt that the United States Senate will concur with the House of Representatives for the passage into law of this vital piece of legislation, which seeks to address Liberia's entrenched culture of corruption and impunity. Today's assembly was jointly organized by Liberia justice advocacy groups and individuals based in the United States, to include but not limited to the Movement for Justice in Liberia, International Justice Group, the Hard Truth, Grassroots Alternative Movement for Economic Freedom, Coalition for Justice Liberia, and some members of the then Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Liberia. House Resolution 1055, among other things, seeks to affirm strong United States-Liberia ties and support for democratic principles. The resolution also calls for the full implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations, including the establishment of an extraordinary criminal tribunal for Liberia. In other words, the resolution urges the government and people of Liberia to support the full implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations. It recognizes and further supports efforts by the Department of State and the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, to advance Liberia's national reconciliation through continual support for the rule of law, effective governance, and robust role of civil society. Madam Speaker and members of Congress, the move by the United States government to reaffirm its unflinching support to Liberia's recovery and development process is in the framework of Resolution 1055, reflective of the long-standing traditional relationship that subsists between the two countries. Born out of the United States during the closing stages of the infamous slave trade in the 1800s, Liberia truly enjoys a special relationship with the United States. It is in the spirit of this bond that we have assembled here today on the historic grounds of the United States Congress on behalf of all Liberians, both at home and in the diaspora, to express gratitude to the government and people of the United States for the immeasurable contributions they continue to make towards Liberia's growth and development. In particular, Liberians are exceptionally grateful for the post-war reconciliation and recovery support efforts the country is benefiting from the United States through its Agency for International Development, USAID. By all accounts, USAID remains Liberia's largest and trusted bilateral donor. Since 1961, USA continues to play a pivotal role in many aspects of Liberia's development, including the sustenance of the country's nascent democracy, governance reform, rights protection, economic growth, education, healthcare, and disaster management. Thanks to U.S. taxpayers for their indefatigable benevolence. Madam Speaker, distinguished members of Congress, it has been more than 15 years now since the devastating civil war in Liberia ended. The war remains the bloodiest ever in the history of the country, which spread to neighboring Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Cote d'Ivoire, thereby destabilizing the entire Mana River Union Basin. Women and girls were raped, children conscripted by various rebel groups as child soldiers. Mass murder took place across the country with wanton destruction of properties. About 250,000 lives were destroyed with massive looting of the economy. Rebel groups, with the support of their benefactors, committed heinous crimes against humanity, violated international humanitarian and human rights laws and protocols. According to the Rome Statute, these crimes fall directly under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court and therefore require investigation and prosecution by the International Criminal Court. Unfortunately, these crimes committed predominantly against armless civilians have never been investigated by the ICC as required, except the crime of aggression committed by Charles Taylor in Sierra Leone, for which he was prosecuted and now sentenced through the special court that was set up by the ICC for Sierra Leone. Interestingly, the Common Article 3 and Protocol 2 of the Geneva Convention was also ratified by the government of Liberia and are applicable to Liberia. These two must be enforced by all members and be accountable thereof. The violations of international criminal laws, international human rights laws, and international humanitarian laws, including war crimes, should never be swept under carpet. The facts are preponderant and evidentiary. All factions that were engaged in the armed conflict in Liberia, one way or the other, violated, degraded, abused, denigrated, and committed sexual and gender-based violence against women and girls, including rape, sexual slavery, forced marriages, and other dehumanizing forms of violations. Massacres, economic crimes, and extrajudicial killings were also committed. Sadly, these carnages, onslaughts, and atrocities committed up to today's date continue to haunt citizens of Liberia because justice continues to be delayed and eventually will be denied if left unattended. Unfortunately, some of those who bear the greatest responsibilities for these heinous war and economic crimes continue to walk scot-free. Most unfortunately, some of these very individuals are being rewarded with state power and have therefore become rulers of their victims at will and at their detriment, displeasure, and dissatisfaction. This has created a tormenting and viciously traumatic cycle for the civilian population. This is wrong, unacceptable, and unjust. Only justice can correct these unthinkable crimes and engender genuine reconciliation and healing. Madam Speaker and distinguished members of Congress, the Liberian civil conflict also witnessed numerous massacres, including but not limited to those of St. J in Grand Cape County, the St. Peter's Lutheran Church on 14th Street in Sincor, and the St. Thomas Episcopal Church on Camp Johnson Road. Delivering justice for these uncivilized and barbaric crimes is the only way to correct the wrongs, reconcile the country and its people, and eventually end the culture of impunity in Liberia. It is and will be unfortunate for the world to let these levels of atrocities go into the books of history without any form of accountability. It will be saddening and mistaken for such crimes to go unpunished. These terrible crimes must be investigated and they require legal measures taken to serve as the best deterrent. Madam Speaker and members of Congress, another dimension of this most heart-wrenching chapter of our history was the killing of 5 American Catholic nuns. As we have consistently underscored in our advocacy, we want to emphasize again today that every well-meaning Liberian condemn this barbaric act and demand justice for their cruel murder in cold blood. It was utterly wrong, and perpetrators deserve an equal measure of justice for their insane actions. It was even reported that these women were raped before being killed by the perpetrators to cover up the horrendous act. Only a special criminal tribunal will establish who raped, gruesomely murdered those humanitarians. Those women were on humanitarian mission and should have been exempted and not targeted. Every decent human being should and must demand answers for these acts. Like you, members of Congress, we are seeking answers to the following questions, and they remain unanswered. Who killed the American Catholic nuns? Who? Why has this human mystery remained unresolved for so long? Why has nobody been held responsible or accountable? Who will stand and speak for those Americans when they can't for themselves anymore? Who will deliver justice for those sisters? When will the world stand up to give them justice? In our candid opinion, a special criminal tribunal, such as the one unambiguously considered in Resolution 1055, will resoundingly answer these critical questions. So, let's do what is right. Let justice be served for the 5 Catholic nuns and every Liberian who paid the ultimate price for that brutal civil war. Let all of us who share this belief of delivering justice with equal measure demand an answer today, and it should be now. The only way these crimes can never happen again. We sincerely believe that it is the responsibility of the world community to act, and the United States, through Congress, is on the right path, as it has always done. While commending the United States for the bold step taken, evidenced by House Resolution 1055, we would like to entreat the International Criminal Court not to turn a blind eye to those acts of savagery against humanity, all because they happened years ago. The court needs to act, and the time is now. Obviously, now is the time for accountability. Now is the time for responsibility. Now is the time for leadership. Oh yes. Now is the time for all perpetrators to answer all of the questions for the evil acts against their fellow human beings. Of course. Now is the time to deliver justice to those brutes who murdered the American Catholic nuns. Oh yes, certainly. Now is the time for all those human-killing machines and looters of the Liberian economy to pay for their actions. It is our hope in this respect that all of us are mindful of the maxim that says, injustice somewhere is justice everywhere. And that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The death of 250,000 of people is completely out of the ordinary. And we think it is time for action. We have no doubt the House Resolution 1055 is the appropriate mechanism based on the outcome of the Truth and Reconciliation process for Liberia to prosecute crimes against humanity that were committed during the Liberian Civil War, as it was in the cases of Rwanda and Sierra Leone, respectively. Madam Speaker, distinguished members of Congress, it is also important to note that the Civil War was launched because of corruption, nepotism, political marginalization, and the abuse of power by previous governments in Liberia. Sadly, these vices remain deep-seated in Liberia today, and the current government is yet to demonstrate commitment to address this situation. These are uniquely worrisome recipes for economic instability and continuous poverty. These two must be given serious consideration and urgent attention for so many reasons. Today, credible reports, such as the ones from the United States Department, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF assessment, and those from the investigation conducted into the reported missing $16 billion Liberian banknote scandal by Crow, a reputable US-based financial crimes investigator under the auspices of USAID, and the Liberian government itself, speak hardly of the worsening economic situation under the watch of the footballing president, George Opomaneweah, evidenced by extreme poverty and hardship currently endured by citizens of Liberia. These credible reports, to a large extent, indicate limited or no prospects for functional recovery and growth in Liberia, which has implications for the stability of an already weary country in transition. For example, the IMF, in its just-ended assessment report on the state of the economy, puts Liberia's growth forecast at 0.4%. This speaks directly to the level of the rapid crashing of the already worsening economy. Also, the U.S. State Department in its 2018 report asserts that impunity for individuals who committed atrocities during the civil wars, as well as for those responsible for current and continuing crimes, remain a serious problem. The government made intermittent but limited attempts to investigate and prosecute officials accused of current abuses, whether in the security forces or elsewhere in government. Corruption, the report underscores that corruption at all levels of government continue to undermine public trust in state institutions. These reports point directly to gross inefficiencies in key government functionaries, waste and abuse of power. The culture of corruption and impunity has emboldened President Weah's administration to the extent that they are consumed by the irrational and unpatriotic belief that siphoning state resources too can go unpunished, just as the cases of killings, rapes, and massacres that others committed during the Civil War. The deteriorating economic situation in Liberia is rapidly brewing apprehension and acrimony. This needs urgent attention because it has the propensity to degenerate into chaos. Today, the prices of basic commodities in the country have skyrocketed, and many homes can hardly afford daily meals. Healthcare institutions are said to be on the verge of shutting down due to lack of medical supplies and needed logistics for their various operations. The quality of education has significantly diminished, and if nothing is done to improve content and infrastructure, illiteracy will remain an impediment to recovery and development. So, recovery of the education and healthcare sectors remain non-negotiable priorities if Liberia should recover from the current state of degradation. Unfortunately, the Weah administration has no credible implementation strategy to address this national imperative. There are fears that unemployment is soaring and companies are threatening to lay off employees. The latest, which is making everyone nervous, is the plan by the largest employer in the private sector, the Firestone Rubber Plantation Company, to lay off 800 of its employees, which represents 13% of the company's workforce in few months from now. One can only imagine how many families will be out of food, shelter, and clothing if this plan is effectuated. Liberians are in troubling times. Madam Speaker, members of Congress, the government's lack of demonstrated will to implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations, coupled with its intolerance to critical voices, labeling them as enemies of the state, muzzling the press, as well as reported killings of key individuals believed to have credible information about the reported disappearance of the missing billions of newly printed Liberian dollar banknotes, and misapplication of the $25 million United States dollars intended to mop up excess liquidity in stabilizing the exchange rate are all indications of a return to the dark days. The recent murder of Matthew Innes of the Department of Regulation and Supervision of the Central Bank of Liberia is a bad omen. Mr. Innes was believed to have detailed information on the disappearance of the billions of the newly printed Liberian dollar banknotes and the misapplication of the $25 million, respectively. Currently, there is a credible indication that a death squad is being organized involving former notorious rebel generals under the canopy of private security for the president on the instruction of the Minister of State for Presidential Affairs. This is worrisome, and everyone is panicking because Liberians have experienced these dictatorial tenets for so long and are today victims of lies, torture, and killings. The video covering some of the recruitment sections are on display on various social media platforms. This undertaking is absolutely wrong because it is not based on need, as Liberia is not at war. Neither is she expected to do so. Besides, increasing the strength of the security is not a priority for a weary country that is already in deep economic crisis. The motive is sinister and has to stop. Madam Speaker, distinguished members of Congress, Liberia needs your urgent attention. And that is exactly why we wish to call on the United States Senate to please concur with the House of Representatives on Resolution 1055, which will facilitate the full and speedy implementation of the recommendations of the TRC as the best deterrent that will put Liberia on a trajectory of sustainable peace and stability. Liberians deserve a better life and a better image. At this juncture, we would like to seize this great opportunity to add our voice to those of our fellow compatriots and congressional members in spotlighting the Defer Enforced Departure, the DED status for Liberians, which is expected to expire on the 31st of March 2019. It is no doubt that Liberians on DED have equally played by the rules. They fled the protracted civil war, came over to the United States through lawful means. For 3 decades, they lived in the United States and established families, many of whom in particular, their children are American citizens. Sending back to Liberia more than 11,000 families who have never been to that country for over 30 years, especially in the current harsh and unbearable economic situation, with an unemployment rate of 86.6% and dramatically declined growth rate of 0.4%, amounts to economic catastrophe. No, this is not what America stands for. This is not in the reputation of the greatest land of possibilities on earth. No. We strongly believe that this impending catastrophe can be averted. We believe that. So, let's do it to save humanity and to further protect the fundamental rights and freedoms of families. Towards this end, we are optimistic that congressional members will swiftly act on a bill or resolution to give these Liberian families permanent status. We are of the conviction that such action by Congress will unite these families and keep them together. instead of separating them. Doing so will further reflect the fundamental ideals of fair play, equality, and justice, which this great union, the United States of America, represents. Finally, Madam Speaker, distinguished congressional members, we wish to unequivocally underscore here that our motivation to gather here today and present to you this statement of support was drawn from your historic magnanimity of standing with and for Liberia in almost all aspects of our national existence. In good times, oh yes, and in bad times too, you have demonstrated true friendship by deploying your financial, human, and material resources to keep our nation going. Today, we are equally optimistic that Resolution 1055 will be a reality. Yet, and impunity will become history. Yes. It is only when we achieve these milestones, my fellow compatriots, Madam Speaker, distinguished congressional members, will we become an economically, socially, and politically vibrant nation. On behalf of U.S.-based Liberians represented here by the different institutions today. These are leaders. These are not ordinary U.S.-based Liberians. These are leaders representing civil society advocacy groups across the length and breadth of the United States, travel from states to come here to present this statement. And we are so pleased that we have been given audience by Congress, the fact that the office of the Speaker has granted us this opportunity. And we have no doubt that the contents of this statement will form the basis for Resolution 1055 to be fully, scrupulously implemented. And like I said, you, Liberians, will celebrate justice for all. Thank you.
1 year. All hail Liberia, hail. All hail Liberia, hail. All hail Liberia, hail.
Yeah, we are ready to come in. Perfect.
We're gonna have Anthony, our secretary, just say a word of thanks for giving us ears.
Absolutely.
Anthony, as you do the presentation.
No, this is not it.
This one is.